So, a lot of people have been asking me about perennialism lately, and for good reason. It is one of the more interesting ideas in philosophical and religious thought, and I think most people who really start looking at these issues, who start looking at metaphysics and religion and theology and stuff like that, go through a phase where they are a perennialist, or at least they're extremely sympathetic towards perennialism. And a lot of the time, when people, even if they ultimately reject perennialism in its pure form, they continue to be a semi perennialist or be influenced by perennialist ideas. Now, that begs the question, what is perennialism? A very basic definition would be it's the idea that all religions have a common source that descends from some sort of primordial spirituality or primordial religion, or however you want to define it, and that all of them are kind of variations of the same thing. And that's kind of the very, very basic definition of it. And once you start to think, well, what does that mean exactly? We get all kinds of different answers for how this functions. Some people might say, for instance, that the different religions we have is the result of greedy, selfish people who want to control the masses, and so have inserted all this extra content into this primordial religion so they can hold power over the masses and for personal gain. Some people will say that the individual religious traditions are good because they're adapting this primordial faith to a particular time and context that helps the maximum number of people reach transcendence or reach greater spiritual heights. You could even have a form of it where you say all religions are true and you just worship all deities, or you have all holy books, or something like that, and you attempt to kind of harmonize them and take the core themes out of all of them. And that's something you see in a lot of sci-fi, where there'll be some sort of weird religion like Orange Catholicism, wherein everything is kind of amalgamated together into the idea that there's kind of this primordial religion of oneness through which all things come. But I guess the question is then, like, what does this even mean? What is primordial oneness? What is any of this? How does this relate to religions? It's very vague and very general. It's like saying all things are the same because all things have a color, or all foods are the same because they all have a taste. It's not very descriptive, it's not very helpful. So I think you can define what the fundamental tenets are, at least the fundamental premises of perennialism. So I think, because I am someone who studied most of the major world religions, I have studied Buddhism, Hinduism, obviously Christianity, to a certain extent Islam and Judaism, some other philosophies and some kind of mystical schools, and I can kind of see where perennialists are coming from. So I'm going to mostly be looking at this from a Neoplatonist perspective, because I think Neoplatonism really kind of summarizes the idea in the most coherent way, in kind of the most stripped down, straightforward way that can kind of explain the whole thing. So the first principle of perennialism is that there is something called the one, or the absolute, or the ultimate, and this is the thing that is eternal. It's always existed, it always will exist. It is perfection itself. It is the only thing, or the ultimate thing, that is real. It is the greatest thing that could possibly exist. In fact, it contains within it the concept of greatness itself. And I'm using this picture from Dante's Inferno, particularly when Dante and Beatrice look at God, because I think this very well summarizes. This is a very good picture of what I'm trying to get at. So at the center of everything, you have the one. Now, this can represent all kinds of different things in different religions. This could be God with an uppercase G. This could be the world, soul, heaven. Whatever your religion is, whatever the highest principle is in it, that is the one. So it pre-existed everything. Now, everything else comes from the one. Everything else, the term they normally use is an emanation from the one. Maybe a good example would be if you throw a rock into a pond, the initial splash is very large, and then they keep going for a while, but they get weaker and weaker and weaker. So at the center of everything, as in this image, you have the one. You have God, you have whatever it is. And then from there, you have the first emanations of the one. Now, once again, it depends very much on the religious tradition, but you will have, like in Christianity, an example might be the idea that things like justice and truth and loyalty and love or stuff are ideas in God's mind. So you can have a bunch of different ways of looking at this. You can have maybe some sort of religion wherein the first emanations tend to be ideas or fundamental principles of nature, things that represent kind of the highest things that humans can comprehend and strive towards. So they could just be abstract ideals like Plato's forms. They could be incarnated in a humanoid form or in a deity form, like Brahma is literally creation, Vishnu is literally preservation, and Shiva is literally destruction. It can be a concept that's made into a being and personified as a way of kind of understanding it. Oftentimes what you'll have is the first emanation of the one will be a more, I guess, kind of personal God figure, whether you call it the demiurge or uppercase G God or the creator or something like that. A sort of being that is one step below the absolute, who wields the power of creation and wields kind of the control over everything, and that's kind of the divine mind. But the point is, the first level of emanation tends to be like faith, hope, and love, concepts like charity, concepts like truth. In Zoroastrianism, something like Asha or the Logos or maybe karma. So the first emanation is kind of these very abstract concepts. And then from there on, you have this great chain of being where things keep getting further and further away from the one. And the further they get away from the one, the more impure they become, the more qualitatively different they have. So you might have the one, then you'll have ideas, then you'll have gods depending upon your system, maybe like Zeus or Aphrodite or Mars or Odin or Amaterasu or Indra. And that would be maybe the second level. And then you would have something like angels, jinn, spiritual beings, things like that, things that are not quite mortal but aren't quite gods. And then the next layer from that will probably be, once again, this depends very much on your particular religion. Then you'll have humans, because humans possess a piece of the one. Like they might be the lowest, along with animals that possess kind of a piece of the one, in that they have rational thought, they have an immortal soul, and characteristics like that. And then below humans, you'll have things like animals, and then below animals, you'll have matter. And even within matter, you'll often have it divided into clean matter and unclean matter and stuff like that. And the entire idea is there is this great chain of being. There is the emanations from the one, and that the ultimate goal of human life is to get back closer towards the one. Whether that is if you were to think about it in a Christian context, the idea would be going to heaven is to be in the presence of the one for all time. It's to, you've left behind the material world, the mortal world, and now you can eternally be in the radiance of the one. In Hinduism, and I'm not sure in Jainism, I think, or I'm not sure about Jainism, but in Hinduism, the goal is to merge with the one. It's to leave behind your individuality and to return to the one through purification over the process of multiple lifetimes. In Hinduism, this corresponds to caste. You have the once-born caste, and then you have the twice-born caste, and then you can only achieve samsara, from my understanding, once you become a Brahmin, particularly a Brahmin male, but it depends upon the particular branch of Hinduism, Hindu thought that you're looking at. So there is this chain of being, there is these levels that you can ascend depending on your particular religious tradition. And this is when you start to get into stuff like Masonry or Kabbalah or any kind of esoteric thing. Generally speaking, there is a ladder of sorts. It's a ladder or a wheel or something that looks kind of like this, where you start very low on it, and then you gradually make your way up. And this is kind of where the whole idea of secret knowledge is. You have like the first set of things that teach you about maybe the outer layers of the circle, and then you work your way inward, and then eventually you're able to grasp the absolute truth and attain enlightenment. What enlightenment means exactly is somewhat open to interpretation. My guess would be that enlightenment, similar to nirvana, enlightenment, nirvana, whatever term you want to use for it, is the ultimate recognition that you are an immortal soul who is one with or similar to God, and all the pains and suffering of this world don't have any ultimate meaning. And it's a sense of joy and fulfillment and freedom that comes from that. And whether that is purely kind of a moral thing or a philosophical thing, or if that has a supernatural perspective where you become a Buddha or you are able to ascend into heaven or end the cycle of reincarnation or whatever, that is, to my understanding, the ultimate truth. The understanding that you are one with God, that you can attain union with it. And that, I think, if you're going to talk about the concept of mysticism, the fundamental idea of mysticism is the idea of oneness with God, of becoming closer to God, of kind of a direct contact and a direct kind of merging of you with God. Now, once again, this depends a lot on different religions. In Christianity, obviously, you can't become God, but you do have deification or theosis, which is the process of infinitely becoming more similar to God. In Hinduism, you might merge into the world soul, or you might become a Buddha. Once again, it differs a lot, but the perennialist idea is there is the one, there is emanations from the one, and there is this ladder or chain of being that leads from the lowest things in creation up to the highest. And so this kind of brings us to the positive and negative aspects of this approach. So from a positive perspective, as I said, it's very parsimonious. It makes a lot of sense. You start to look at it and you go, yeah, there is some common moral teachings throughout different cultures. There is similar ideas that show up in different places. God show up, the afterlife, the soul, reincarnation. You'll even find similar deities like storm gods, war gods, god kings, sky gods, stuff like that will show up independently in different civilizations. You'll find similar teachings, similar writings, and stuff like that. And it does seem to make sense. It does seem that, to a certain extent at least, these people are all talking about the same thing. They do believe in this ultimate reality, this ultimate truth. I mean, at a very basic level, if nothing else, you can say man is a spiritual being. And even if he does, a man kind of has to believe in something. Even if he doesn't necessarily believe in God or the supernatural, something will take that place within him because that is what he is oriented towards. And he is oriented towards that because that is the nature of reality. And so we kind of come to the issue that I think a lot of people tend to shunt aside whenever you're talking about perennialism. In order to make this work, you have to do a lot of cherry picking, a lot of very liberal interpretations of different religions, viewing a lot of things as being metaphorical, just overlooking particularly things when it comes to specific morals or practical matters. And I think if you actually start to take I don't know if a deeper look or a less deep look is what I'm talking about, you start to kind of look at the trees a bit more and ignore the fact that you're in a forest, you'll start to see that the trees are of a very different kind. They might be pine trees instead of palm trees or something like that, if that metaphor makes any sense. But to get to this kind of perennialist conclusion, it leads to the idea that there's no fundamental difference between these religions and that they all come from the exact, basically the same fundamental idea. You have to ignore a lot of just kind of aspects of how they view the world. Like, is it really the same for someone to become a Buddha and become kind of a deity figure, but who still exists as an individual versus remerging with the world soul? Is the idea of a personal God who is a person or a trinity really compatible with the idea that God is just the one and that it's the alternate reality and he doesn't have a personality or something like that? Is the idea that the universe is finite, that it has a beginning and an end, compatible with the idea that there is a cyclical universe or an eternal universe? Is universal salvation compatible with eternal damnation? And I think if you go through these religions and you take them at their word and you take them seriously and the truth claims they make, and you don't just abstract them and view them as metaphors, I do think you start to get into a position where you can't reconcile these things as much as you think you can. In Christianity, we think that God is a Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, whereas Islam defines God as being an absolute unity who's largely unknowable. While both of these ideas do maintain that there is one God who is the creator of everything, they're very fundamentally different. In part because Christ being God is how he is able to redeem the world through his sacrifice, which is something you don't have in Islam. So it's a very fundamental concept, key to salvation. A lot of forms of Buddhism don't believe in a personal God, at least not a personal God with an uppercase G. And I do think it is somewhat condescending if you go to a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or whatever. But I think to a certain extent you are accusing them of bad faith, of going, look, you don't actually believe that God is a Trinity, or your idea that God is a Trinity is a metaphor for this indivisible unity of the one, where that is, or your idea of a personal God is not actually God, it's the first emanation of the one from which the world was created, and even the creator God or the demiurge will eventually return to the one. I do think, I don't know if this is a straw man, but I do think in order to make perennialism work, you have to reject a lot of the truth claims of the various religions, their specific doctrines, and just kind of hand wave it away and dismiss it. I find often a key part of this is denying any kind of historical claim made by a religion. So, to Christians, either Jesus lived and died or he didn't. And as it says in the Bible, if Christ did not die for our sins, then our faith is useless. Our religion is based on a historical truth claim and can be disproven if somehow, I don't know, Jesus' body was found or something like that. Whereas I think in a more perennialist perspective, it would be, oh, it was a metaphor, or Jesus is an incarnation of the one, or something like that. And I do think it's very dismissive, even when you start to get into some other things like how the world is viewed. So Gnosticism, which is, I think, one of the, I guess, kind of purer forms, I suppose you could say, or the least specific forms of perennialism, holds that the material world is evil and the spiritual world is good. And that all is good is the one, that matters fundamentally evil, matters fundamentally bad, that you need extreme aestheticism. A lot of them are anti-natalists because you're bringing souls into a horrible world. Whereas in Christianity, like, they don't believe that. They think the world is fallen and corrupt and has issues with it, but it is also good and beautiful because it was created by God. And in Gnosticism, you have Yahweh as being evil, whereas Jesus is an incarnation of the one. And I don't think, if you start getting into the specifics, if you start getting into the truth claims, that any of these things really are fundamentally the same. That's not to say there isn't a lot of similarities between them and a lot of fundamental truths, but the idea that there is ultimately not a distinction between them and that they all come from exactly the same source I don't think holds up. The problem is, though, once again, it's a very vague term, because you could have it anywhere from what I would call semi-perennialism, the idea that there is a God, that there is the soul is immortal, that there is objective morality, things like that. Maybe just very basic theism or very basic spirituality. And you could say, okay, well, I'm a perennialist in the sense that all humans are born naturally seeking God, and you could say that as a Christian or a Muslim or as most religions, and they would agree with that. And you could say that's kind of a perennialist idea, but not go further than that. Or you can take a broader perspective and say that the individual traits of religions need to be removed and harmonized. Maybe we need one kind of pluralistic faith, like I said, that just kind of merges everything together. There's so many different layers of it. And that's not even to get into like moral issues like abortion, like homosexuality, like whether you're able to have wealth or not. There's just a lot of things that I think it kind of hand waves away. In a lot of ways, it is very similar to like liberal Christianity or liberal Islam or people with the coexist stickers or stuff like that, or the idea all religions are the same and that sort of thing. The difference is that perennialism is generally something right wing people have. So it tends to have a very different character to it, and kind of what it posits as being these fundamental truths tends to differ a lot from kind of religious liberalism or more left wing forms of religious universalism, even if they are very similar in the presumptions that they make. And I think that's kind of the ultimate issue. It's if you're going to boil everything down to this fundamental basic religion, it doesn't really, by providing all the answers, it kind of doesn't provide any answer. I mean, I went through what the main traits are that I think are universal, but like I said, it doesn't answer political questions, it doesn't answer moral questions, it doesn't answer specifically how to get to the one, it doesn't answer contradictory questions about the nature of reality, free will, how the universe came into being, what is natural for needed for salvation. It says there is something that all of these are partaking in or are looking at, but it doesn't answer the question. It just says there is a answer to the question, and all these different groups have a partial answer to the question, but it doesn't really posit what the fundamental one is. And maybe they say that that is relative to your particular culture and society and stuff like that. It's just once you start to make things abstract enough and loose enough and denature the specifics enough, it gets very easy to kind of just start slotting things together. To kind of go back to the broader idea, it's like, okay, well, you have a house cat. Then you have, I guess, I don't know if it's the genus or whatever of felines. So you'll have like tigers and lynx and house cats and stuff like that. And then you go to carnivores, and then you can say that cats and dogs are the same thing because they're both carnivores. And then mammals, and then life versus non-life. And the more you get rid of specific traits, the more you can kind of blend things together. So that is, I think, a fair representation of perennialism, why I think it has a lot of weight to it, and why I think it has a lot of problems with it that I like I said, I feel people tend to hand sweep away. Now, to get off of the educational part and just to go into my personal opinion, as you all know, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, so I feel that our position is I tend to call it semi-traditionalism or semi-perennialism. We do believe very strongly that all human beings are born with a natural desire for God, for God's love, for redemption, for theosis or deification, for the process of becoming infinitely closer to God, both in this life and in the next. And that is something that naturally exists in all cultures because man is a spiritual being and he has that inherent desire. And there is aspects of Christian truth in all different religions. In Buddhism, you'll have a lot of the life ethic when it comes to things like abortion, when it comes to things like individual compassion. If you go into Pure Land Buddhism, you'll even get ideas like salvation through personal faith in a deity, that the deity in question has basically paid an infinite debt in order to forgive your personal sins. In Islam, you'll have ideas about the absolute sovereignty and unity of God, that basically nothing happens without him, and some things like that. And even once you get into like Hinduism or very dissimilar religions, you will find a lot of commonality. Even if you go into something like Confucianism or Taoism or something like that, you'll find a lot of things that are similar to Christianity or compatible with Christianity and can kind of be adopted somewhat. So I personally think that all religions contain varying amounts of truth, but the fullness of truth only comes from Christianity, specifically Catholicism. That most religions have a concept of God, the divine, the one from which all things emanate, which is correct, but that its ultimate form is the Trinity, and that mankind is saved by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And so I do think that other religions are a reflection of Christianity, a flawed reflection of it. And I do also think that there is this chain of being to a certain extent where you can be more right or less right. You can be a better person or a worse person. You can be closer to God or further away from God. And like I said, we have this conception in Christianity. It's especially emphasized in Eastern Orthodox thought of theosis or deification, wherein I think it was Augustine who said, God became man so man could become God. That God ultimately wants us to become more like him, to achieve a certain degree of divinity in ourselves, although it'll never be anything like his. So I do think a lot of perennialist ideas do apply to Christianity, and I do think it is something you can use to strengthen your faith. To go that, look, well, all these things definitely come from somewhere, because these are things that independently exist in multiple cultures. Like I talk about this a lot with the family and marriage and stuff like that. This is something that emerged in different cultures and is readily recognizable, even if they really had no relationship to each other and there wasn't really any cross-pollination. Wherever human societies develop, particularly civilizations, you will see certain things emerge that naturally come from human nature and from reality and stuff like that. So that's kind of my personal opinion. I'm not going to just go into too much detail just because this video is long enough. But those are my thoughts on perennialism, semi-perennialism, and Christianity. I hope you found that interesting. I hope I didn't strawman the position or anything like that, because it is a very interesting idea. And it is something, like I said, I kind of have a semi-perennialist view where I do think you can learn stuff from Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or stuff like that. But none of these religions possess the fullness of the truth the way Christianity does. So, hope you found the video interesting. God bless, and I will talk to you all again real soon.